Hi, good evening. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So, should we get this started? I have the questions up here. Are you ready?
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So, my first question is, could you start by introducing yourself and telling listeners a little bit about your journey so far?
Yeah, so as you know, my name is Maleeha Hameed, and I'm currently working as a senior policy analyst in the CGD education program with President Rachel Glenister. My journey so far has been all about connecting research with real world action, making sure evidence actually makes a difference. So in 2025, very recently, I completed a master's in international development policy at Georgetown University. And many years ago, I did a bachelor's in economics and politics from LUMS, a top college in Pakistan. And the master's degree was, sort of a delayed decision because of work that kept coming up. But since bachelor's, I've been working across South Asia and then very recently Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America in education research and policy. And one of the things I really love working on is programs that touch thousands of students and teachers, hence my interest in education. So, for example, in Pakistan, I was managing a massive education research portfolio of projects that reached over 1 million students and over 5,000 teachers. And it was really helping design studies, track implementation, and translate research into actionable policy recommendations that actually got used. And the program goes by the name of LEAPS. It's based out of Harvard Kennedy School and a few other sister organizations if you want to look it up. In the last 2 years, I've been working mostly on scaling A/B testing interventions. So basically, experimenting with various versions of interventions that have worked in Rwanda and then more recently with the World Bank in Ghana and Nigeria. So, really to help governments use evidence to improve learning outcomes in budget constrained systems because that's a
Yeah.
question which is of prime importance and interest but is has not been solved yet. um, and really, before working at the intersection of research and policy, I was involved in some level of institution building by supporting the inaugural dean set up the first school of education at LUMS, which was the college I also went to, and launch its first graduate degree program. This was my first stint right out of college. And along the way, I've just learned that it's not about the numbers, it's about the people. So working closely with researchers, policymakers, and donors has really taught me how to bridge the gap between research and action. As I mentioned, I'm working now at CGD, working on the Global Education Advisory Panel, in continuing the same focus, which is turning evidence into real impact in budget constrained education ecosystems.
Does CGD stand for anything? Or.
Center for Global Development.
Okay, makes sense. Well, that sounds amazing. I think we'll get more into all your work as this interview progresses. So, my next question is, what initially drew you into education policy and development economics?
Mm, that's an interesting one and probably has a tinge of personal elements in there. Um, so I think it really sort of was coming from my own experiences, and what I've seen around me. Um, I, I, I mean, my exposure and when I was growing up, I was mostly in Pakistan, and I would often think about women, and in particular in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is the northwestern province of Pakistan where I belong,
Mhm.
um, who would dream of a life they could have if they'd gone to school. I saw these people, around me, in various settings. Um, and it was very interesting to see that we shared the same culture, at times, the same language, at times almost very comparable backgrounds as well. Yet our life paths turned out to be so different. And it really made me start thinking that it all came down to access to quality education, and exposure to quality education that really became the determinant of these different trajectories. Um, the second thing which drew me to education and development economics was experiencing firsthand how challenging learning can be, even in a top school. So I was a hardcore science student through high school. And then come college, I decided to pivot to social sciences, and I'd never studied econ. But I was very drawn to, this. So the college I went to was almost like a liberal arts college in the sense of you could take courses from various disciplines, but my major was econ and politics. And so there I had to, sort of get exposure to, for the first time, to macro, to micro econ. And it almost seemed like alien concepts, with the supply and demand curves, which you will soon learn about. And none of it was making sense to me initially. Of course, the applied part was making a lot of sense, but the theory was, I certainly struggled to grasp those concepts. And that really sensitized me to understand how low academic performance affects students, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds or girls who often face much more self-doubt than men. And so that's where, while I was in college, I started working at a social enterprise that used to help students in disadvantaged neighborhoods with their learning, and also help with some sort of extracurricular activities. And from there was sort of no looking back. But I guess the final sort of pinnacle was in closer to I think in my junior year or something in college, I took an applied econ course on poverty and development. And it really opened my eyes to the power of evidence-based programs. I realized well-designed policies grounded in research can actually improve people's life, um, and even shape broader social and economic outcomes. And so it really solidified my passion for combining rigorous research with real-world action to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And of course, that was after coming to terms with, the economic theory and all of those, difficult concepts that I was initially struggling with.
That's super cool. I imagine the transition from being a more sciencey student in high school to social sciences in college must have been quite the change. I would definitely say I'm more of a social sciences person, and I struggle sometimes with the sciences, especially physics. It's quite challenging.
Yeah, it's a very different way of thinking about the world itself, right?
Mhm.
Where, with econ especially, there are these assumptions you make. And in a way, it's also comparable, right? Or similar. Like in physics as well, you have all of these assumptions. But I think maybe there's a little more sort of flexibility in terms of how you look at the world in social sciences. Certainly much more, human elements there, as opposed to, physics, chemistry, which are all around, just I mean, in chemistry, we were just like mixing, chemicals and all. And in physics, we were using vernier calipers, doing all of those crazy things. And it was certainly a pivot.
I think the joke is I've seen online that in you have laws in both physics and economics, except in economics the laws are the exceptions. So I think that's how it goes.
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned at the start that you recently transitioned into a new role as senior policy analyst. By the way, congratulations at CDG. What inspired this move, and what excites you most about it?
Hmm. I think this might sound a little repetitive, but I'll keep probably saying the same thing in different words. But really, so I'd done this stint in Pakistan, sort of, doing the whole like being embedded in the impact evaluation world, engaging a little bit on the policy side, increasingly towards the tail end of that tenure. And then when I came to grad school, I was involved again in quite a lot of research, applied research. And then at the World Bank, I was again, sort of doing quite a lot of the technical work, and sort of working closely with governments then to sort of apply it. With CGD, it's really a chance to work at the intersection of research and policy at a global level, right? So before it was, maybe regional or maybe, focused on specific countries. But this is really now looking at education at a global level, right? And the idea isn't just evidence generation, right? It's synthesis of existing evidence. And really the end goal is how do we sort of turn it into global policy action? So as I mentioned, the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, it comprises about 13, the panel comprises about 13 education experts from research, practice, and policy. And the idea is for everyone to come together and deliberate upon what is it that low and middle income countries should be investing in terms of cost, in terms of effective education interventions. And so really, this idea of sort of taking stock of what has worked, seeing, then sort of synthesizing it into bite-sized insights that education systems can then use to make smarter decisions quickly and at scale was certainly very compelling. The CGD approach itself is certainly something which was another thing which drew me towards it, which is that they combine novel research with timely agenda setting and translating findings into actionable steps. And that's something which really resonated with me, especially given its focus on equity and ensuring resources reach learners who need it the most. In most places, or at least in my prior experience, it was more so around evidence generation, not around agenda setting per se. And so here there's this chance of, synthesizing, putting out in sort of real world equivalent terms what would work, what would not work in education, and just be involved in that sort of global discourse on what people should be investing in.
So, about the intersection between research and policy, could you give me an example, please, of maybe a project you did that's really about it, or the process you went through, if, of course, you're allowed to talk about it?
No, of course. At CGD or just generally?
Anything.
Yeah, so when I was in Pakistan, this is 2020, COVID hit. And then everyone was stumbling, right? So with COVID, people were thinking about, okay, like we need to have a continuity, like, sort of like a recovery plan for COVID, right? Of like when schools have shut down, how do we continue learning, right? So like people came up with all of these remote learning solutions and whatnot. But then increasingly with time, when the second wave came in and the third wave came in, people started thinking seriously about what needs to be done when kids return to schools, right? Which was the most important sort of question to ask, because from other research we'd seen, especially on a study conducted after the aftermath of the earthquake in Pakistan in 2005, we'd seen that a lot of the learning losses, they happen once kids return to school, as opposed to the time that they spent out of school at homes, and learning is continuing in some manner or another. And the reason that learning loss happens when kids return to school mostly is because the system sort of goes back to doing what it was doing, assuming that kids would be able to start off from where they left. So for example, with COVID, there were these kids who were, say, in second grade, right? And by the time they returned, they'd like almost skip that one grade just doing remote learning, right? And when they re-entered, they were in, say, third grade or fourth grade or something like that. And so if they were treated just like, a third grader or a fourth grader and just given that curriculum, that basically meant that kids' concepts, grade 2 concepts that those kids would have never had. And so we proposed something which was something that had been done and tried and tested and proven before, which is, a targeted instruction foundational learning program, which was that when kids return, give them, rapid, very focused remediation with this targeted instruction methodology, where for 40 days they go through this remedial course. And the idea is that first students are tested to see what their learning levels are, then they're put into various groups, and then the teacher sort of tailors instruction to them based on their learning needs versus just basing it on their grade level requirements. So they will shift away from regular curriculum. And then, the teacher tracks the students, and then ultimately what happens is that they can adjust their levels. And ultimately, the idea is that you sort of plug the learning gaps through the sort of remedial foundational learning program, which is based on targeted instruction. And targeting really means like tailoring instruction as opposed to going with, regular curriculum. And one of the issues with curriculum around the world, and especially in LMICs, is that it's usually very over ambitious. So, a grade 2 student has to do quite a lot of stuff, right? A grade 3 student has to cover a lot of bases, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really allow time for that procedural mastery of what kids need to know at grade level, in terms of foundational skills. So we proposed this idea, and the federal ministry liked it, and then we had to build it, and we had to implement it, and we had to sort of evaluate it. So as I mentioned, this intervention had been tried and tested in sub-Saharan Africa and India before. So sort of the intervention was not novel, but the way we were thinking of doing it was to sort of help teachers by support them with technology, so give them some sort of tools which they can use through this process. And it was the first time that it was happening in Pakistan in the public education system in a post-COVID environment, as part of regular curriculum. So here, what basically happened was, as we were building the research study, the way we built the intervention was thinking about, okay, what are the existing structures and what are the existing processes through which, learning happens, through which remediation happens? What are the plans in place for students by the public education system itself, right, when they return? And so the idea was to really sort of embed the study that we were thinking of, because ultimately we wanted to see, right, whether it would plug the gaps or whether it would not plug the gaps, and whether it would improve student learning outcomes, was to really align it with, what the system needed and what the system had planned and what the system had the capacity to do, and sort of build their capacity around sort of the innovations that we were proposing. And so from just a research study, we translated that whole program into a version which aligned with what was in the system, and we implemented it. It was certainly a very difficult task, very challenging, but now as of 2025, the government is planning to scale it up. And so there were various policy decisions we had to take of putting the regular curriculum or classes on hold for this program to happen, for students to not take centralized exams. And the government was very cooperative and collaborative, as long as we showed them the evidence or the rationale for doing so. And so now they've picked it up, and they're going to be scaling it up, at least some parts of it. So this is one example of how sort of research translates into policy or works at the intersection of policy.
That is so fascinating. I remember I did all of my 6th grade online, and when I went to school in 7th grade, the first few months were very difficult, just getting used to everything. But as you said, tailoring classes seems like it would really help that process. I mean, especially if it's to certain groups of students, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly something which is very difficult to do, right? Because like most of these classrooms have like 100 or 80 or even 50 students, right? And like the standard is 25 to 30 students to one teacher, right? So it's a completely, the teacher student ratio is completely off. And so in that environment, the way teachers were implementing it, and this is like right after COVID, right? Or like in sort of the midst of schools figuring out how to go back to business as usual after COVID. So there was certainly a lot of, willingness to try it out and a lot of like, creative ideas that came in, but it was certainly very challenging, but certainly very worth it as well.
Awesome. So that kind of leads into my next question, which is how do you see such education policy helping to encourage economic development in developing countries and LMICs across the world at a large scale?
So, I mean, education is one of the most powerful levers for economic growth, right? In LMICs. And it's not just about increasing access to schools, which it seems like there's, quite a lot of schools emerging, mom and pop schools, that are emerging. Um, in Pakistan, when I would go out for field work, every street would have like multiple academies and private schools, right? So schools are there. It's also not about increasing just textbooks or giving trainings to teachers. It's really about improving the quality of teaching and learning. So one of the things which is really important is ensuring that strong foundational skills are built at the primary level, to set students up for success, both in higher grades and then also to sort of support their learning in, non-foundational subjects. For example, if a kid knows how to read, be it in English or, whatever language, whatever other language there is, they would be able to read the science textbook, which, articulates more advanced concepts. So, really giving students the foundational tools that they need to be able to advance onto, higher levels on the schooling end, right? And then one of the other things is complementing it with mentoring and guidance, right? To really help kids figure out what they want to do, supporting them to achieve those goals can really have huge impact on individual life paths and collectively on the economy. And we've seen that when students actually learn and develop skills and with the right guidance, they're more likely to find employment, earn higher wages, and contribute to innovation and growth. And if you look at the 2018 World Development Report, referred to as WDR, it calls this the learning to realize education's promise, emphasizing that improved learning outcomes really drive both individual well-being and long-term economic growth. And then, I mean, these are all, one might say, well, this is all research, it's all in the textbooks, it's all in the books.
Welcome to your
I've
NFL
also
I'm
seen
so
it
headlines of the
sorry.
day.
firsthand.
Continue.
I've also seen it firsthand on the ground, right, through my personal experience and field work. So, for example, more women in Pakistan are joining the workforce now just because of better education or more accessible education. The average age of marriage for women has increased in the and really, opportunities are shifting. Of course, labor force participation is still way lower than what we see in HICs. Um, but we do see this shift, this generational shift, which has happened through the years, and closely can be tied to education. So education just doesn't just transform individual lives, right? It really transforms societies, creating the skills, opportunities, and aspirations that can ultimately fuel broader economic growth.
Yeah, I completely see that. Education is definitely a big part of. I'm a student, so first-hand experience, I guess. But people who tend to pay more attention, I guess this is on the micro level, or do their work, I would definitely see do well in other areas as well, whether it be athletically or maybe just decision wise?
Yeah, it's basically, the persistence and hard work. Maybe it's also a little bit of it is also, you know, the sort of like the other aspect of education, right? Which is uh the grooming, right? Or sort of like, someone was presenting recently about, the non-cognitive side of it, right? Of like it sort of makes you instills in you perseverance, right? Or like attention to detail. It also has
Absolutely.
all of those aspects to it.
The character building, one might call it.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's also a lot of work on, or sort of, this aspect of like education and sort of like, citizenship. It's the role it plays in that.
So, my next question is for students like me who are passionate about economics, policy, education, and in that area, what skills or experiences would you say are the most valuable?
Ah, um, I guess I think what I'm going to say is probably not going to be like specific skills, but it's more so going to be something that maybe I wish someone had told me at the time when I was trying to figure things out. But like each person can sort of distill the sort of skills that they're looking for, from what I'm going to say. I think the first thing I'd really say is really get to know yourself, what excites you, what you're good at. Um, and knowing that will really help you figure out where to focus your energy on, right? So at times, there are these inherent sort of skills that we have, right? Someone has high executive function, right? Someone just really enjoys locking themselves up in a room and like writing or like reading, right? So just see what sort of, your interests and your skills are. Um, and then don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone, even if, once you know what you like and what you want to do, even beyond that, go out and like sort of explore what more you can do. And one of the things which I did very late in life, and I wish I'd done it earlier, was going out into the field, talking to people, whether it's people on the ground, whether it's people in your neighborhood, whether it's people in your friend's neighborhood, just talking to people and sort of seeing things for yourself firsthand, you'd be surprised how much it can challenge what you think you know, and even change the way you see the world. And that's where real learning happens. Like one of the things I do when I travel is I just talk to locals and ask them, about their lives. Um, and it's just so interesting to see, like, how exactly people are living their lives and sort of broadens your perspective on how to think about the world, which is certainly a very important skill, critical thinking skill that you need in this field. Um, and lastly, remember, speaking of perseverance and hard work, it requires a lot of hard work and persistence to be in this field. So learn the skills you need, keep reading, learning, and exploring, and just don't give up when it gets tough, because when it gets tough, it means that something good is going to happen after that. Um, and just stay curious, bold, think big. We stop thinking big after a certain age. Our brains become a little plastic. Maybe don't do that, and you'll be amazed to see the impact you make when you combine your passion with action. Um, this is probably too, broad and fluffy, but I wouldn't pinpoint skills, because people might be looking to do various things in this field, and there's just so much scope to do various things.
No, no, I think that may not have been the answer I wanted to hear, but it was definitely the answer that I needed to hear. So, thank you. Following up on that, are there any internships, research opportunities, or youth driven initiatives at CDG, or maybe the World Bank, or maybe anywhere that you know of that you'd recommend that someone my age or maybe a little older could get involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. So organizations like CGD and also the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan, where I worked, and other comparable organizations, such as JPEL, IPA, they're all in this network of research and policy. They offer internships program where you can get hands-on experience in research, writing, and even fieldwork, just to sort of expose you to what this world looks like and get you involved in some tasks. And that exposure is honestly at most times much more important than the work itself, right? Like the work
Mm-hmm.
might seem boring, but it's sort of the exposure and that is sort of, just sitting in on focus group discussions, even if you're not leading them, right? That sort of prepares you for future roles. And these opportunities are a fantastic way of also exploring different areas. So, like, some might be drawn to education, some might be drawn to migration, some might be drawn to gender. So, it's also a way to sort of see what really excites you. So look up their websites, and you'll certainly see quite a lot of around summer. There's now quite a lot of uptake of even high school students and college students for internships in these various organizations. I think the World Bank looks for candidates who are a little senior, or with maybe at least a university level or a bachelor's qualification. But it's always to keep an eye out. They always have, sort of these initiatives, right? Even for like younger adults. And one other place to look out would also be UN organizations. They also have these various sort of opportunities. So keep an eye out, and maybe the first internship you get is not going to be exactly what you were looking at. But at least it teaches you something, right? Do you want to stay in the field? Do you not want to stay in the field? Do you want to try another sector? What is it that you really want to do? So take it as a hit and trial sort of a process.
It's awesome. Thank you. I have one question left, and we have 5 minutes, so that works out perfectly. My final
Great.
question is, what's one book, idea, or lesson that has had a strong influence on the way you think about education policy or your perspectives in general?
Mm. Honestly, a lot of my inspiration comes from people I meet in the
Mm-hmm.
field, and just seeing, students, teachers, and various people in education systems, and even otherwise, right? As I mentioned, through field work that I did in Rwanda, it gives me a lot of optimism about what's possible. Um, and one lesson that has really stuck with me is, and this is coming from interacting with various people, is how small, consistent improvements can lead to big change over time. And I'll give you I'll give you a little anecdote. Um, so the work I was doing in Pakistan was basically based on these, um, on sort of tracking these women in villages in 3 districts in the largest province in Pakistan over, more than a decade. And so we went to meet them um, somewhere in 2022, if I'm not wrong, or 2023. And I saw it firsthand, right? Like young women from families where their mothers didn't have education, pursuing schooling, sometimes even outperforming their male siblings or cousins. Some of them having gone to run their own small businesses, whether it was tuition academies, whether it was crocheting, whether it was salons, and really, marginally shifting their life paths, and influencing the communities around them. Um, and really, what came out of that was that persistence, effort, and even like at the macro level, right? Like reforms that stick, they really do make a difference, not just in an individual life, but across the society. So it's not just about sweeping changes or big programs, but it's really about designing policy gains, because over time those gains add up to lasting and meaningful change. And at an individual level, it's about, making those changes or making those marginal improvements in your life or in what you do, on a consistent basis, and then sort of seeing the results for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and all your responses. They were fantastic. Do you
Well,
have
it
any
was a
questions
pleasure
for me?
speaking.
Or
No, just feel free to. I'm happy to sort of share more leads on the internship related
okay.
stuff if that's something of interest. But kudos to you for setting this up and being the bridge
Thank you.
between your
Thank you.
peers and people who are out in the sector.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
then, thank you. Have a good one.